A great man once said, "When there is no enemy within, the enemies outside cannot hurt you." In the good old days, prior to the detonation of the Brexit bomb, those who sought to leave the European Union had overseas enemies to engage with, an enemy without, if you will. The patronising Guy Verhofstadt, the worryingly serene Gilf Ursula von der Leyen, and the sexy grandad Michel Barnier. They were real, tangible foes with which to engage in debate, negotiation, or simple name-calling. But the big day came, the decision was made, and suddenly the far-off foes of Guy, Ursula, and Michel drifted off into the distance, no longer visible, tangible, or seemingly able to interfere with our sovereignty, as we removed ourselves from the European mega-blob. A guilty pleasure is to occasionally watch the faces of the BBC blob fall, then desperately reshape as they stuttered through announcing the unimaginable news that the plebs hadn't done as they were told. But just as one battle was over, another had begun. The enemy without may have been defeated, but the enemy within were not so ready to surrender. The European collaborators may have failed in their permission to deny the plebs their voice, but the war was far from over. Brexit has never really gone away, and I suspect it never will. Where once we were taking on nations across the Channel, we now face a Brexit of home, just in different disguises and methods. Parliament obsessed for years under the always charismatic Theresa May over deals, no deals, withdrawal agreements, protocols, and the like. Not much else seemed to get done or matter. Then came bumbling Boris and the hard or soft-boiled borders debate. It seemed that as much as Brexit was meant to be a practical, cultural, and symbolic vote, the passage of time has made it not only impossible to fully implement, but has also rendered it in many ways a mostly symbolic victory and a Pyrrhic victory for those who voted to leave. And all the while, the enemy within were making sure that such errors would never, ever be repeated. The volume was turned up on the culture wars, the persecution of the deplorables, the somewhere people, the flag fluffers and history lovers, the green and pleasant land people, the leavers, began in earnest. With all the Brexit hand-wringing, the fatally divided Conservative Party forgot to do what it said on the tin, to promote social conservatism with a dash of left-leaning economics. Putting aside the fact that since we took back control of our borders, illegal immigration has increased tenfold, notably not only are the Conservatives not socially conservative at all anymore, they have in reality become radically progressive, blind to the indoctrination and hypersexualization of our children in school, blind to the suppression of free speech and the rise of cancel culture, which would make the people of Salem proud, blind to the erosion of prosperity and individual liberty via lockdowns and the inflation tax on the poor required to pay for them. People who wanted a fresh start and a get-out-of-the-way government got exactly the opposite. Our taxes are sky high. In fact, everything you wouldn't want to be sky high is sky high, and not in a good way. But then you have Labour and its suspiciously quiet leader, Keir Starmer. Lord knows what he's got planned for his inevitable stumble through the door of number 10 next year, but doing what Labour says on the tin won't be too high on the agenda, one imagines. To be fair, trying to find room to the left of the Conservative Party on the political spectrum is pretty tough going these days. So it does lead one to wonder if these parties are actually what we thought they were, or whether, as the Orange Man Bad and others have declared, democracy is more of an illusion than we have been led to believe. Are Western nations democracies, with decisions taken by politicians in representation of their constituents, or is a deeper state at work? A small number of ideologically determined social engineers who will change the character of the Western world permanently and irrevocably, whether we like it or not. Social media has been swamped this week with private companies in lockstep with government-sanctioned PSHE and RSE classes in schools, painting their coffee vans and Dr. Martin boots, once a symbol of an edgy and rebellious nature, with pictures of happy girls with scars on their chests where their breasts used to be, joyously celebrating the mutilation of confused and neurodivergent young children. Not enough to erase the word woman from the language, now let's erase her physical characteristics as well. Mussolini said that fascism should be more rightly defined as corporatism, the merger of state and corporate power. Polling on the issues surrounding the sexualization of children is unequivocal. Both traditional left and traditional right, meaningless terms in the era of the Uniparty, loathe this vile deviancy with a visceral passion. And yet the government and the corporations push on, inundating us with pictures of young people who have been grievously bodily harmed. The people are not represented in their repulsion and rejection of this cruel and permanent mutilation. Media and social media cry foe at anyone who takes a torch to the flag of the mutilation cult, parasitizing so conveniently the rights of gay and lesbian people. Then there is the insanity of net zero. I see people jumping for joy that even Rishi Sunak has spotted the fury and also possibility in people drawing a line at being made poorer still during the poorest times for many. A climate crisis which apparently affects only Britain's future generations, because whilst our children must suffer, the next generation of Chinese kids will be booming on the prosperity of Britain's regressive guilt. Rishi started making these pseudo-conservative noises on the 31st of August, when the chamber of the House sat empty, possibly because it doesn't take enormous courage to give a performance in an empty theatre. I suspect normal service will resume when MPs gather to pretend to disagree about everything again, making sure never to debate the issues prohibited from discussion by the enemy within. And once the Labour puppets are in, Brexit will be back on the table, never to leave us in peace. The enemy within, displeased at the errors of the previous referendum. Alistair Heath argued and suggested in an article in The Telegraph this week, referenda as a way of loosening the stranglehold of the managerial elite that they have around the population's neck. Not a bad idea, one might think. I know which way I would bet over the schools issue. And as we approach the next election and the £1 trillion price tag for net zero looms starkly into view, perhaps a referendum on that madness would be a promise the Conservatives should consider. There is some logic to it. The enemy within has decided it is the other half of the Uniparty's turn to ruin the country for a while. So the chances of it happening are almost zero, but it would at least give the ever more cynical and demoralized public some hope that politicians weren't merely puppets of enemies within who wield power from out in the darkness. Oh, and the person who said, when there is no enemy within, the enemies outside cannot hurt you, was one Winston Spencer Churchill.